My name is Chandler Chavez, and I'm a corporate attorney in Seattle. I've worked hard to get where I am today, climbing my way up through law school on scholarships and sheer determination, building a career that I'm genuinely proud of. At 29, I have my own apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, a respectable position at Morrison & Chase LLP, and the kind of independence I've craved since I was old enough to understand what freedom meant. I'm not the type to rely on anyone. Never have been. My parents raised me that way, though probably not intentionally. Growing up in Portland in a family that valued self-sufficiency above all else, I learned early that if you wanted something, you worked for it yourself. No handouts, no shortcuts, no leaning on family money even though we had it. That Tuesday started like any other. I woke up at 6, went for my usual run along the waterfront, showered, dressed in one of my carefully selected power suits, and grabbed my coffee on the way to the office. The Seattle morning was typical, gray clouds hanging low over the water, the smell of rain in the air even though it hadn't started yet. I loved this city. Loved the anonymity it offered, the distance from my childhood home, the sense that here I could be whoever I wanted to be without the weight of family expectations. My morning was packed with back-to-back meetings. A contract negotiation for one of our tech clients, a conference call about a merger that had been dragging on for months, endless emails that needed immediate responses. It wasn't until my lunch break that I noticed the pile of mail my assistant had left on my desk. Most of it was the usual stuff: professional correspondence, legal journals, a few advertisements. But one envelope caught my eye. It was from Pacific Northwest Bank and Trust, the institution that held my trust fund. The envelope was thicker than a normal statement, and something about it made my stomach tight with an inexplicable sense of unease. I set down my salad and opened it. The letter was formal, typed on official letterhead with all the appropriate logos and signatures. But the words didn't make sense at first. I had to read them 3 times before they actually registered in my brain. Dear Ms. Chavez, we are writing to confirm the closure of trust account 84729553901, which was finalized on March 15, 2022, as per your written request. This letter serves as final confirmation that all funds have been transferred according to your instructions, and the account has been permanently closed. If you have any questions regarding this matter, please contact. I stared at the paper, my salad forgot. March 15, 2022. That was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, someone had closed my trust fund account, and I had no memory of it whatsoever. My grandfather had established that trust fund for me when I turned 18. I remembered that day so clearly it could have been yesterday. It was my birthday dinner, just me and Grandfather Eduardo at his favorite restaurant, the one with the white tablecloths and waiters who moved like ghosts between tables. He'd handed me a manila envelope across the table, his weathered hands steady despite his age. Mija, he'd said, his accent still strong even after 50 years in America, this is for your future. $500,000, but you cannot touch it until you're 30 or unless you face a true emergency. I want you to build your life first, to know your own strength before you have this safety net. Understand? I had understood. I'd hugged him, thanked him, and tucked that envelope away. The trust fund had always been there in the back of my mind, a reassuring presence. I was turning 30 next year, and I'd been thinking lately about what I might do with that money. Maybe a down payment on a house, maybe investments, maybe something I hadn't even considered yet. The point was, I had options, or at least I thought I did. Now I was staring at a letter telling me that account had been closed 3 years ago, and I had absolutely no memory of closing it. I picked up my phone immediately and dialed the number on the letterhead. A pleasant female voice answered after 2 rings. Pacific Northwest Bank and Trust, this is Jennifer speaking. How may I help you today? Yes, hi. My name is Chandler Chavez. I just received a letter about a trust account that was apparently closed in 2022, but I have no recollection of closing it. Can you help me understand what happened? There was a pause, the sound of typing. Let me pull up your account information, Ms. Chavez. Can you verify your account number for me? I read off the number from the letter. More typing, a longer pause. Okay, I see the account here. Yes, it shows it was closed on March 15, 2022. The funds were transferred to account number ending in 8847 at Delaware Community Bank. My heart started beating faster. I didn't authorize that transfer. I don't even have an account at Delaware Community Bank. I understand your concern, Ms. Chavez, but I'm showing here that we have your signed authorization form on file. The transfer was processed according to your written instructions. That's impossible, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. I never signed anything like that. Can you send me copies of whatever documents you have? I'll need to transfer you to our records department for that. Please hold. The hold music was some generic jazz that did nothing to calm my racing thoughts. I was a lawyer. I knew better than anyone how important it was to read every document before signing. There was no way I would have authorized closing my trust fund and transferring $500,000 to some random bank without remembering it. After what felt like an eternity, a different voice came on the line. Ms. Chavez, this is Martin Chen from Records. I understand you're requesting copies of the documentation for the closure of trust account 840-729-553-901? Yes, I need to see everything you have. The authorization form, the transfer documents, all of it. I can certainly help you with that. Due to the sensitive nature of these documents, I'll need to verify your identity first. Can you confirm your social security number and date of birth? I provided the information, my hands trembling slightly. This was real. This was actually happening. Thank you. I can have these documents sent to you via secure email within the next 24 to 48 hours. Is the email address on file still current? Yes, that's fine. But Mr. Chen, can you tell me anything about the signature on that authorization form? Does it look legitimate? There was a pause. Ms. Chavez, I'm not a handwriting expert, but the signature on file appeared valid enough for our verification process at the time. If you're disputing this transaction, I would recommend you contact our fraud department as well. Would you like me to transfer you? Yes, please. The next hour was a blur of transfers, explanations, and increasing frustration. The fraud department told me they'd need to open an investigation, which could take weeks. They asked if I'd filed a police report. I hadn't because until an hour ago I didn't even know there was anything to report. They recommended I do so immediately. By the time I hung up, my lunch break was long over and my salad had wilted in its container. I sat in my office, staring at the letter that had appended my entire day, and tried to think logically about what could have happened. Someone had forged my signature. That much was clear. But who and how? The documents would have required not just a signature, but also verification of my identity. They would have needed my ID, my personal information, access to details that only someone close to me would know. I opened my laptop and started searching through my files. I kept meticulous records of everything, every document I'd ever signed, every major financial transaction. There was nothing about the trust fund closure. Nothing at all. Then I remembered something. About 3 years ago, I'd noticed my old driver's license was missing. It had already expired, and I'd just gotten my new one, so I hadn't worried too much about it. I'd assumed I'd misplaced it somewhere during the move to my current apartment. But what if someone had taken it? What if someone had used it to impersonate me? The thought made me feel sick. I pulled up my calendar from March 2022. That month had been insane. I'd been working on the Westbrook Industries merger, one of the biggest cases of my career at that point. 80-hour weeks, sleeping at the office, barely having time to eat let alone pay attention to personal matters. If there was ever a time someone could have done something like this without me noticing, that would have been it. And then I saw it. March 20, 2022. A weekend I'd blocked off with a simple note, Portland family. I'd gone home that weekend. I remembered now. Marcus had called me, saying Mom and Dad really wanted to see me, that it had been too long. I'd been so exhausted from work that I'd almost said no, but guilt had won out. I'd driven down to Portland for the weekend, spent Saturday and Sunday at my parents' house, then driven back to Seattle late Sunday night. During that visit, I'd had to leave suddenly on Saturday afternoon. One of my clients had called with an emergency, and I'd rushed to a coffee shop to take a conference call that lasted 2 hours. I'd left my purse at my parents' house. When I came back, it was sitting right where I'd left it on the kitchen counter. Or at least, I'd thought it was right where I'd left it. The more I thought about it, the more details came back. My wallet had been slightly askew in my purse. I remembered noticing it and thinking I must have been careless when I'd grabbed my phone before leaving. But what if it wasn't carelessness? What if someone had gone through my purse while I was gone? My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was my assistant, reminding me I had a meeting in 5 minutes. I pushed all of this aside, forced myself back into work mode, and made it through the rest of the afternoon on autopilot. But that evening, alone in my apartment with a glass of wine and the city lights twinkling below me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. $500,000 gone. Transferred to some account I'd never heard of, using documents I'd never signed. And the only people who would have had access to my personal information, who could have taken my ID from my purse that weekend, who knew enough about me to forge my signature convincingly, were my own family. No, I shook my head, taking another sip of wine. That was crazy. My parents wouldn't do that. Would they? We weren't close, exactly. My relationship with my family had always been complicated. My father, Richard Chavez, was a real estate developer, always chasing the next big deal, always focused on building wealth and status. My mother, Patricia, came from old money and had never worked a day in her life, spending her time on charity boards and country club luncheons. They'd raised me and Marcus with a strange combination of privilege and emotional distance. Growing up, we did everything money could buy: nice house, private schools, family vacations to Europe, but we'd never had much warmth. Affection in the Chavez household was measured in achievement, not hugs. You earned love by succeeding, by making the family proud, by never causing problems or showing weakness. I'd learned to be independent because depending on my parents emotionally was exhausting and unrewarding. They praised me when I got into Yale Law School, were proud when I landed my job at Morrison & Chase, but we didn't have the kind of relationship where I called them just to talk. Our interactions were formal, scheduled, more like business meetings than family time. Marcus was 6 years younger than me, which meant we'd never been particularly close growing up. By the time he was old enough to be interesting to talk to, I was already away at college. Now he lived in Portland, working some job in marketing I'd never fully understood. We texted occasionally, saw each other at holidays, but we weren't confidants. Still, they were my family. Stealing from me, forging my signature, that would be insane. Wouldn't it? But then again, who else could it be? Who else had the access, the information, the opportunity? I picked up my phone and pulled up Marcus's number. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment before I pressed it. He answered on the third ring. "Chandler, hey, what's up?" "Hi Marcus, how are you?" "I'm good, busy with work stuff. You know how it is. What's going on? You never call in the middle of the week." There was something in his voice, a slight tension that I couldn't quite identify. Or maybe I was imagining it, reading suspicion into innocent surprise. "I wanted to ask you something. Do you remember that weekend I came home in March 2022? The one where I had to take that emergency work call?" Silence on the other end. A long, heavy silence that made my stomach clench. "Marcus? Yeah, I think I remember. That was a while ago, though. Why? Do you remember anything unusual happening that weekend? Like, did anything weird happen while I was there?" "Weird how? Chandler, what's this about?" His voice had changed, become defensive. I could hear it clearly now. This wasn't confusion, it was fear. "Nothing, I'm just trying to remember some details from that time. My job, I need to verify some dates for a case I'm working on." It was a lie, and not even a particularly good one, but I needed to see how he'd react. "Oh, well, I don't really remember much. It was just a normal weekend, right? Look, I actually have to go. I'm meeting Jessica for dinner and I'm already running late. Can we catch up later?" "Sure, yeah, tell Jessica I said hi." "Will do. Bye, Chandler." He hung up quickly, almost too quickly. I sat there staring at my phone, my wine forgot. Marcus knew something. I was sure of it now. The way he'd stumbled over his words, the sudden need to end the conversation, the defensive tone, it all pointed to someone who was hiding something. But what exactly? Did he know who had stolen from me? Was he involved somehow? The thought made me feel sick again. My baby brother, the kid I'd helped with homework when he was little, the gangly teenager I'd teased about his terrible taste in music, could he really have betrayed me like this? I spent the rest of the evening going through my records, searching for any clue I might have missed. I pulled up my credit reports, checked all my other accounts, verified that nothing else was missing or had been tampered with. Everything else was fine. It was just the trust fund. Just $500,000 that my grandfather had left me. $500,000 that had vanished while I was working myself to exhaustion, trusting that the people who were supposed to love me wouldn't stab me in the back. By the time I went to bed that night, I'd made a decision. I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. I was a lawyer, for God's sake. I knew how to investigate, how to find evidence, how to build a case. And if it turned out that my own family had stolen from me, well then they were going to learn that Chandler Chavez wasn't someone you could cheat and expect to get away with it. The next morning, I requested the day off from work. My boss, probably noticing how distracted I'd been the previous afternoon, approved it without question. I spent the morning on the phone with Pacific Northwest Bank, pushing them to expedite sending me those documents. They finally agreed to email them by end of business. When the email arrived at 4:30 that afternoon, I poured myself a strong cup of coffee and opened the attachments with shaking hands. There it was, the authorization form, scanned in high resolution. And there at the bottom was my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. Not quite. I'd signed my name thousands of times. I knew every loop, every angle, every quirk of my handwriting. And this signature was close, very close, close enough to fool a bank teller who wasn't looking too carefully. But it wasn't mine. The capital C in Chandler swooped too far to the left. The Z in Chavez had an extra flourish at the bottom that I never included. Small differences, subtle ones, but to my eye they were glaring. Someone had practiced my signature, had gotten very good at forging it, but they'd made mistakes. Tiny, telltale mistakes. I looked at the other documents. There was a copy of a driver's license, my old expired one, the one that had gone missing. And there was a form with my personal information, date of birth, social security number, mother's maiden name, all the security questions banks asked. Whoever had done this had known me well, had known me intimately. I sat back in my chair, staring at my laptop screen, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't some random identity theft. This wasn't a stranger who'd somehow gotten hold of my information. This was someone I knew. Someone I trusted, or at least someone I'd given access to my life. And the most likely candidates were the people who'd been in that house with me the weekend this all happened. My parents, my brother. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number before I could talk myself out of it. "Chandler, sweetheart, what a nice surprise. How are you, darling?" My mother's voice was bright, cheerful, completely normal. If she was hiding something, she was doing an excellent job of it. "Hi, Mom, I'm okay. Listen, I need to ask you something." "Of course, dear, what is it?" "Do you remember anything about my trust fund, the one grandfather set up for me?" There was a pause, just a brief hesitation. "Your trust fund? Well, yes, I remember your grandfather setting it up when you turned 18. Why do you ask? Have you ever had access to the account information? Like, would you or Dad know the account number or anything about how to access it?" "No, darling, that was entirely between you and your grandfather. And the bank, of course, is everything all right? You sound worried." She sounded genuinely concerned. I found myself wanting to believe her, wanting to think that my mother would never do something so awful. "Everything's fine, I just need to verify some information. Can I talk to Dad?" "Of course, let me get him." "Richard, Chandler's on the phone, she wants to talk to you." There was rustling, the sound of the phone being passed, and then my father's deeper voice came through. "Chandler, what's this about?" No greeting, no "how are you," just straight to business. That was Dad. "Hi, Dad, I'm calling about my trust fund, the one from grandfather. Do you know anything about it?" "Know anything about it? Chandler, what kind of question is that? It's your trust fund, not mine. Why would I know anything about it?" His voice was sharp, almost offended. "Is there a problem?" "I'm just trying to track down some information. Did you know it was supposed to be available to me when I turned 30? "Yes, I remember your grandfather mentioning something like that. You're turning 30 next year, aren't you? Planning to use the money for something?" "Maybe. I'm still figuring things out." "Well, that's good. That money could be a good down payment on a house, or you could invest it. Your grandfather was smart to set it up that way, making you wait until you were mature enough to handle it responsibly." He sounded completely normal, completely unbothered. Either he truly knew nothing about what had happened, or he was an incredibly good liar. "Dad, that weekend I came home in March 2022, do you remember that?" Another pause, longer this time. "March 2022? That was 3 years ago, Chandler." "I don't remember specific weekends from that long ago." "Why?" "No reason, just trying to remember something. Look, I have to go, I have a call coming in." "All right, tell them hello from us in Seattle if you run into anyone we know." "Will do, bye, Dad." I hung up and sat in silence for a long moment. My parents either knew nothing, or they were both excellent actors. Or maybe they really had convinced themselves they'd done nothing wrong, the way guilty people sometimes could. But Marcus had definitely been hiding something. The way he'd reacted when I'd called him, the nervous energy in his voice, he knew something he wasn't telling me. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them over the phone. I needed to see my family face to face, needed to look them in the eyes when I asked them directly what had happened to my money. I opened my laptop and booked a flight to Portland for the coming weekend. Then I sent a text to my parents, "Coming home this weekend. See you Saturday afternoon." My mother responded almost immediately with a string of excited emojis and "can't wait to see you, sweetie." My father didn't respond at all, which was typical. I looked at Marcus's name in my contacts for a long moment, then decided not to tell him I was coming. If he was involved, I wanted to catch him off guard. I wanted to see his genuine reaction when I showed up with questions he couldn't dodge. The rest of the week crawled by. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself, but my mind kept circling back to the missing money, the forged signature, the weekend 3 years ago when someone had betrayed me. On Friday evening, I packed a small bag and tried to figure out exactly what I was going to say when I got there. How do you accuse your own parents of stealing from you? How do you confront your brother about covering up a crime? What words do you use when the people who are supposed to love you might have stabbed you in the back for money? I didn't sleep well that night. I kept dreaming about the last time I'd seen my grandfather, 6 months before he died. We'd had lunch together at that same restaurant where he'd given me the trust fund paperwork 10 years earlier. He'd looked older, more tired than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes had been sharp as always. "Mija," he'd said, holding my hand across the table, "promise me something. Promise me you'll always be true to yourself. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for demanding what's yours, for standing up for yourself. Family is important, yes, but not if they ask you to betray who you are." At the time, I thought it was just general advice, the kind of wisdom old people imparted. Now I wondered if he'd known something, if he'd been trying to warn me about something he'd seen in his own children. Saturday morning, I drove to Portland in my sensible sedan, the city of Seattle disappearing in my rearview mirror as I headed south on I-5. The drive usually calmed me, something about the rhythm of the road and the endless evergreen trees. But today, I felt nothing but a tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. I arrived at my parents' house just after 2 in the afternoon. It was the same house I'd grown up in, a large colonial in one of Portland's nicer neighborhoods, with a perfectly manicured lawn and tasteful landscaping. Everything about it screamed success and respectability. How many secrets were hidden behind that respectable facade? My mother answered the door before I'd even made it up the walkway, her arms already open for a hug. "Chandler, oh, it's so good to see you, sweetheart. Come in, come in." She looked the same as always, perfectly styled hair, expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent, flawless makeup even on a Saturday afternoon. Patricia Chavez never appeared in public, even her own driveway looking anything less than impeccable. I hugged her back, trying to ignore the voice in my head asking if these were the arms of someone who'd stolen from me. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for having me." "Don't be silly, this is your home. You don't need to thank us." "Your father's in his study, let me go get him. Are you hungry? I can make you something." "I'm fine, Mom, I ate on the road." She bustled off toward Dad's study, and I stood in the foyer of my childhood home, looking at everything with new eyes. The expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the crystal chandelier overhead, had any of this been purchased with my money? My father emerged from his study, my mother trailing behind him. Richard Chavez was a tall man, still handsome in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention in any room. He'd always intimidated me a little, even as an adult. "Chandler," he said, extending his hand for a formal handshake rather than a hug. "Good to see you. To what do we owe the pleasure of this visit?" Right to the point, as always. "I need to talk to you both about something important. Can we sit down?" My parents exchanged a glance, something passing between them that I couldn't quite read. Then my mother smiled brightly and said, "Of course, dear. Let's go to the living room. Would you like some tea, coffee?" "I'm fine, Mom, thank you." We settled into the living room, me on one sofa, my parents together on the other. The positioning felt symbolic somehow, them united on one side, me alone on the other. I pulled out my laptop and the folder of documents I'd printed. My hands were steady, years of courtroom experience helping me maintain my composure even though my heart was racing. "I received a letter from Pacific Northwest Bank earlier this week," I began, keeping my voice level and professional. "It informed me that my trust fund account was closed 3 years ago, in March 2022, to be specific. Does either of you know anything about that?" My mother's eyes widened. "Closed? But Chandler, how is that possible?" "That was your grandfather's trust for you." My father's expression was harder to read. He sat very still, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me want to squirm, but I held his gaze. "That's what I'd like to know," I said, "because I never authorized it to be closed. Someone forged my signature and transferred $500,000 out of that account." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a serious accusation," he said finally. "Do you have proof of this forgery?" I opened my laptop and turned it around, showing them the scanned signature. "This isn't my signature. It's close, but it's not mine. and the only people who would have had access to my personal information, who could have taken my expired ID that went missing around that time, are people close to me. Chandler and Chavez, my father said, his voice going cold in the way that used to terrify me as a child. I don't like what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Dad. I'm stating facts. $500,000 was stolen from me using forged documents. I was in this house the weekend those documents were filed. My purse, containing my personal information and ID, was left unattended for several hours. My mother was shaking her head, tears forming in her eyes. How can you think such things about us? We're your parents, we would never steal from you. Then help me figure out who did, I said, hearing my voice rise despite my best efforts to stay calm. Because someone did this and I'm going to find out who. My father stood up abruptly. I think you should leave, Chandler. You come into our home and accuse us of theft based on nothing but wild speculation. I won't stand for it. Wild speculation? Dad, the money is gone. Someone forged my signature and stole $500,000 from me. And you immediately assume it was us, he said coldly. Your own parents. Do you have any idea how insulting that is? How hurtful? My mother was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. Chandler, please don't do this. Don't tear this family apart over money. I'm not tearing anything apart, Mom. Someone already did that when they decided to commit fraud and theft. Get out, my father said quietly, but with such force that I actually flinched. Get out of this house. And don't come back until you're ready to apologize for these outrageous accusations. I stood up, gathering my laptop and documents with shaking hands. My mother was sobbing openly now, and some part of me wanted to comfort her, wanted to take it all back and pretend none of this had happened. But I couldn't, because $500,000 was gone, and someone in this family knew what had happened to it. I'm leaving, I said quietly. But this isn't over. I'm going to find out the truth with or without your help. I walked out of that house with my head held high, even though my vision was blurry with tears I refused to let fall until I was safely in my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, trying to compose myself. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Marcus. Where are you? I'm in Portland. We need to talk. Now. His response came 3 minutes later. At my apartment. What's going on? I didn't answer, just put his address into my GPS and started driving. It was time to confront my brother and find out exactly what he knew about my missing money. Marcus lived in a decent apartment complex in Northwest Portland, the kind of place young professionals rented when they were doing okay but not great. I'd been here once before, briefly, when he'd first moved in 2 years ago. The building was modern, all glass and steel, with a trendy coffee shop on the ground floor. I parked in the visitor spot and texted him that I was downstairs. Within a minute, he appeared in the lobby looking nervous. He'd lost weight since I'd last seen him at Christmas, and there were circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. Hey, he said, giving me an awkward half-hug. You want to come up or? Let's walk, I said. There's a park around the corner, right? He nodded, and we fell into step beside each other, the silence between us heavy with everything unsaid. The late afternoon was cool, typical Portland weather, and I pulled my jacket tighter around myself. We reached the small neighborhood park and found a bench away from the playground where a few families were watching their children. Marcus sat down first, his hands clasped between his knees, his whole body language screaming discomfort. I sat beside him and cut straight to it. I just came from Mom and Dad's house. His head snapped up. You went to their house. Chandler, what? My trust fund is gone, Marcus, all $500,000. Someone forged my signature and transferred it out of my account 3 years ago, and when I asked Mom and Dad about it, they threw me out of the house. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. You know something, I said, watching him carefully. When I called you earlier this week, I could hear it in your voice. You know what happened to that money? Chandler, he stopped, swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Marcus, please, I need to know the truth. He stood up suddenly, starting to pace. You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. He turned to face me, and I was shocked to see tears in his eyes. My brother, who I'd rarely seen cry even as a child, was crying. If I tell you what I know, it'll destroy everything, he said, his voice breaking. Mom and Dad will never forgive me. The family will fall apart. The family is already falling apart, I said, standing up to face him. Someone stole from me, Marcus. $500,000 that grandfather left me. Do you understand how serious that is? That's not just theft, that's fraud, forgery, possibly multiple felonies, and you're protecting whoever did it. He sank back onto the bench, his head in his hands. I sat beside him and waited, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've known for 2 years." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Known what?" "About the money, about what they did." "They?" I asked, though I already knew. "Mom and Dad?" He nodded, still not looking at me. It was in the spring of 2023. I was over at their house, helping Dad with something in his office. He left to take a phone call, and I saw some papers on his desk. Documents for a company called Chavez and Partners LLC. I'd never heard of it before, so I was curious. I looked through them. He finally looked up at me, his eyes red. There were bank statements, Chandler. Statements showing transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and one of the source accounts had your name on it. I felt dizzy, like the world was tilting beneath me. "And you didn't tell me." "I confronted Dad about it right away," Marcus said quickly. "I demanded to know what was going on. He told me to mind my own business at first, but I wouldn't let it go. Finally, he sat me down and explained everything." "Explained what exactly?" Marcus took a deep breath. "He said that grandfather's trust fund wasn't really fair, that you were already successful, already making good money as a lawyer. He and Mom were struggling with some investments that had gone bad. They needed capital to start this new real estate venture, so they used your ID and information to access the trust fund. Dad said you wouldn't even miss it, that you didn't need it anyway." The casual way he recounted this, as if it were somehow reasonable, made me want to scream. "And you believed that?" "No, of course not. I told him it was wrong, that he had to tell you, that he had to pay it back. We had a huge fight about it. But you still didn't tell me." He looked down again, shame written across his face. "Dad said that if I told you, he'd cut me off completely. And then he made me an offer." "An offer?" My voice came out flat, dangerous. Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. "He said he understood I was upset. He said he wanted to make things right with me, to show me that family takes care of family. He transferred $100,000 into my account. Said it was an early inheritance, a gift to help me get started in life. And he promised that when they sold one of the properties they'd bought with your money, they'd give me one of the houses." I stood up so abruptly that Marcus flinched. "You took it. You took money that you knew came from stealing from me, and you kept quiet about it." "Chandler, please. How much?" I demanded. "How much did they steal? Just my trust fund, or was there more?" He hesitated, and I knew there was more. "Marcus, tell me." "There was also money from grandfather's estate. About $200,000 that was supposed to go to a charity. Dad was the executor, so he had access. He redirected it into the same company. $700,000. They'd stolen $700,000, and my brother had known about it for 2 years and said nothing. I felt something break inside me, something that had been holding together my image of my family, my belief that despite our issues, we were still fundamentally connected by love and loyalty. That illusion shattered into a million pieces right there in that Portland park. "I need you to be very clear with me right now," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Are you telling me that our parents stole my trust fund, stole money meant for charity from grandfather's estate, used it to start a real estate company, and then bribed you to keep quiet about it?" I know how it sounds. Do you? Because it sounds like my entire family betrayed me. It sounds like the people who were supposed to love me decided I was worth less than a real estate deal. "It wasn't like that," Marcus said desperately. "They convinced themselves it was okay. Dad kept saying you didn't need the money, that you were doing fine on your own. Mom said grandfather would have wanted the money to stay in the family anyway, to help us all succeed. They rationalized it until they believed their own lies. And you? What lies did you tell yourself to justify taking that money?" He started crying again, really crying this time, his shoulders shaking. "I told myself I'd pay you back someday. I told myself it was just a loan, that they'd make it right eventually. I told myself that if I took the money and stayed in their good graces, I could convince them to come clean, but I was lying to myself. The truth is I wanted the money. Jessica and I wanted to buy a house, start our lives together, and I saw an opportunity and I took it." At least he was being honest now. It didn't make me feel any better. "Jessica knows?" "No, God no. I told her it was a gift from Mom and Dad, an early inheritance. She has no idea where it really came from." I sat back down on the bench, suddenly exhausted. "What's the name of this company again? Chavez and Partners?" "Yeah, it's a real estate investment company. They've bought 2 properties so far, both rental properties in Portland. The plan was to flip them or rent them out for profit." "Using my money," I said bitterly. "Chandler, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but please, if you go after them, can you leave me out of it? I'll pay back the $100,000, I swear. It'll take time, but I'll do it. Just please don't." "Don't what?" Don't tell anyone you were complicit in fraud. Don't expose the fact that my baby brother sold me out for the price of a house down payment. He flinched like I'd slapped him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back 2 years of wondering why my family felt so distant. Sorry doesn't give me back the trust that you all shattered. Sorry doesn't fix anything, Marcus. I stood up again, needing to move, needing to do something with the rage and hurt burning through my veins. I'm going to need you to write down everything you know. Every detail about the company, the accounts, the properties, all of it. And I'm going to need you to be willing to testify to what you just told me if it comes to that. Testify? Chandler, you can't be serious. You're not actually going to what? Hold our parents accountable for committing multiple felonies? Yes, Marcus, that's exactly what I'm going to do. But they're our parents, and I'm their daughter. My voice rose despite my best efforts to stay calm. That didn't stop them from forging my signature and stealing from me. That didn't stop you from taking money you knew was stolen. Why should it stop me from demanding justice? Marcus looked at me with something like fear in his eyes. You've changed. You used to be softer, more understanding. When did you become so cold? I became cold when my family stole $700,000 from me and lied about it for years. I became cold when I realized the people I trusted most in the world cared more about money than about me. Don't you dare act like I'm the problem here, Marcus. I'm not the one who committed fraud. He wiped his eyes, something hardening in his expression. Fine, you want to destroy this family? Go ahead, but don't expect me to help you do it. Then I'll do it without you, I said. But when the lawyers and investigators start asking questions, remember that you had a choice. You could have done the right thing today. You could have chosen to help me. Instead, you're choosing them again. I started walking back toward the parking lot, my vision blurred with tears of rage and hurt. Marcus called after me, but I didn't turn around. I was done listening to excuses and justifications. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, trying to process everything I'd just learned. My parents were thieves. My brother was complicit. My entire family had betrayed me for money and then looked me in the eye and lied about it, but I wasn't some helpless victim. I was Chandler Chavez, a lawyer who'd built her career on fighting for justice and holding wrongdoers accountable. If my family thought I'd just accept this, just walk away and let them keep what they'd stolen, they were about to learn they'd made a terrible mistake. I pulled out my phone and called my best friend from law school, Nora Chen. She was a forensic accountant now, one of the best in the business, and if anyone could help me unravel this mess, it was her. She answered on the second ring. Chandler. I was just thinking about you. How are you? I need your help, I said without preamble, and it's going to be complicated and probably uncomfortable. Okay, you're scaring me a little. What's going on? I took a deep breath and started from the beginning. The missing trust fund, the forged signature, my confrontation with my parents, Marcus's confession. Nora listened without interrupting, making small sounds of shock and sympathy at various points. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Nora said, "Holy shit, Chandler, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. Say you'll help me. Say you'll help me trace the money and build a case. Of course I'll help you. But Chandler, you know what this means, right? If you pursue this, if you actually take legal action against your parents, there's no coming back from that. Your family will never forgive you. They already betrayed me, Nora. What is there to forgive? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying you should be prepared for the consequences. This is going to be brutal. I know, but I can't just let this go. I can't let them get away with this. Okay, then let's do this right. First thing Monday morning, you're going to file a police report. Then we're going to get a forensic audit started on this Chavez and Partners company. We're going to trace every dollar and build an airtight case. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. The certainty in her voice steadied me. Thank you, Nora. Hey, that's what friends are for, though I have to say, this is the most dramatic thing you've ever called me about. Usually it's just boring questions about tax law. I managed a weak laugh. Yeah, well, life comes at you fast. Where are you right now? Portland, in my car outside Marcus's apartment. Are you okay to drive back to Seattle tonight? Because if not, you can stay with me. I'm only 20 minutes from where you are. The offer made tears spring to my eyes. Real friendship, real loyalty, it was such a stark contrast to what I just experienced with my family. I think I'll take you up on that, actually. I don't think I'm in the right headspace to drive 3 hours right now. Good, come over. I'll order Thai food and we'll strategize. And Chandler, we're going to get through this. You're not alone. Those words, simple as they were, meant everything. I spent that evening at Nora's apartment, eating pad thai and going through everything I knew about the theft. Nora took copious notes, asking detailed questions about dates, amounts, and the paper trail. She explained what documents we'd need, what evidence would be most compelling, how the investigation would likely proceed. The good news is that with your brother's testimony, you have a witness who can corroborate the fraud, Nora said. The bad news is that he admitted he's not willing to testify against them. He will be, I said grimly. He realizes I'm serious when he understands that he's either part of the solution or part of the problem. He'll cooperate. He has to. And if he doesn't, then I'll build the case without him. The bank records don't lie. The forged signature is there. The money trail can be followed. It'll be harder without his testimony, but not impossible. Nora nodded slowly. You know, I've known you for almost 10 years and I've never seen you like this. This focused, this determined. This angry, you mean? That too, but it's more than anger. It's like you've finally decided to fight for yourself instead of just going along with what everyone else wants. Her words struck something deep inside me. She was right. All my life, I'd been the good daughter, the successful one who never caused problems. I'd kept my distance from my family not out of rebellion, but out of a desire to avoid conflict. I'd built my own life but never challenged them when they made unreasonable demands or crossed boundaries. I'd been so busy proving I didn't need them that I'd never stood up to them. That was about to change. Monday morning, I was back in Seattle, sitting in a police station filing a formal complaint for fraud and identity theft. The detective assigned to my case, a middle-aged woman named Detective Sarah Mendez, listened to my story with a neutral expression that gave nothing away. Ms. Chavez, she said when I finished, I want to be straight with you. Cases involving family members are always complicated. They're emotionally difficult, and they can be hard to prosecute even with solid evidence. Are you certain you want to proceed with this? I'm certain, I said firmly. And you understand that if we investigate and find evidence of criminal activity, your parents could face serious charges. We're talking potential felony convictions, possible jail time. I understand, she nodded. All right. I'll need you to provide me with all the documentation you have. Bank statements, the forged signature, any correspondence, everything. We'll also need to interview your brother. He may not be cooperative, I warned. We'll deal with that when we come to it. For now, let's focus on building the strongest case possible. I left the police station feeling strangely lighter, like I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying without realizing it. I was taking action. I was refusing to be a victim. Felt good, even though I knew the hard part was still ahead. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into the investigation with the same intensity I brought to my biggest cases at work. Nora ran a complete forensic audit of Chavez and Partners LLC, tracing every transaction, every transfer, every dollar in and out of the company. What she found was even worse than I'd imagined. Chandler, you need to see this, Nora said one evening, spreading printouts across her dining room table. Your brother wasn't lying about the 2 properties, but there's more, a lot more. I leaned over the documents, trying to make sense of the numbers. What am I looking at? This is a complete breakdown of where your money went. $500,000 from your trust fund, $200,000 from your grandfather's estate. That's the $700,000 we knew about. But they also took out loans using the properties as collateral, another $300,000. They've been running this company for 3 years and they're leveraged to the hilt. Are they making money? Not really. The rental income barely covers the mortgages, and here's the interesting part. She pointed to a series of withdrawals. Regular transfers to personal accounts. Your parents have been paying themselves a management fee of about $5,000 a month. That's $60,000 a year of your money going directly into their pockets. I felt sick. So they've just been using my inheritance as their personal piggy bank. Essentially, yes, and there's something else you should know. Nora pulled out another document. I did some digging into your parents' personal finances. They're not doing well, Chandler. They've got credit card debt, a home equity line of credit that's maxed out, car payments on vehicles they can't really afford. From what I can tell, they've been living beyond their means for years. So they stole from me because they needed the money to maintain their lifestyle. It looks that way. I'm sorry, Chandler. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. But in a strange way, it was. Because it meant there was a clear motive, a clear trail of evidence. It meant I had a case. Detective Mendez was equally interested in Nora's findings. This is good work, she said, reviewing the audit report. Really good. Ms. Chen, would you be willing to testify as an expert witness if this goes to trial? Absolutely, Nora said. And Ms. Chavez, have you had any further contact with your parents or your brother? My mother has called me several times. I haven't answered. My father sent me one email telling me I was breaking his heart with my baseless accusations. Marcus has been texting me, asking me to please drop this, saying I'm tearing the family apart. Are you having second thoughts? I met her eyes steadily. No, I want justice. I want my money back. And I want them to face consequences for what they did. Detective Mendez nodded. Then here's what happens next. We're going to bring your parents in for questioning. We'll present them with the evidence we have and give them a chance to explain. Depending on their response, the district attorney will decide whether to file charges. This is likely to take several more weeks, possibly months. I understand. Ms. Chavez, I'm going to ask you one more time to really think about this. Once we bring them in, once this becomes official, there's no taking it back. Your family relationships will be permanently altered. They're already permanently altered, I said quietly. My family stole from me and lied to my face about it. Whatever relationship we had before is already gone. I'm just making sure they can't do this to anyone else. The day my parents were brought in for questioning, I couldn't focus on anything at work. I kept checking my phone obsessively, waiting for updates from Detective Mendez. Finally, at 3 in the afternoon, she called. Your parents have retained a lawyer, she said. They're refusing to answer questions, but the DA has reviewed the evidence and we have enough for charges. We're moving forward with indictments for fraud, forgery, and theft. Formal charges should be filed within the week. My knees felt weak. This was really happening. What happens now? They'll be formally arrested, arraigned, and released on bail unless the DA argues they're a flight risk, which is unlikely in a case like this. Then we move toward trial, though most cases like this end up settling with a plea deal. Are you prepared for what comes next? This is going to be public, Ms. Chavez. Your family's finances will be scrutinized. There will probably be media attention given your parents' standing in the Portland community. I hadn't thought about that. My parents were well known in Portland's social circles. My father's real estate dealings, my mother's charity work, this would be a scandal. Good. I'm prepared, I said. One more thing. Your brother's lawyer reached out to us. Marcus Chavez is offering to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for immunity. He's willing to testify against your parents. I closed my eyes, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. Marcus had finally chosen a side, but it had taken the threat of criminal charges to get him there. What do you think? I asked. I think his testimony will strengthen the case significantly. But Ms. Chavez, you should know that this means he's admitting his own complicity. He's going to have to confess to accepting money he knew was stolen, to covering up the crime for 2 years. His reputation will be damaged, possibly his career. And your parents will see this as the ultimate betrayal. Should have thought of that before he took the money, I said, more harshly than I intended. I'm not disagreeing with you. I just want you to understand the full picture. Your brother is trying to save himself now, but he's going to lose a lot in the process. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in Portland, my parents were meeting with their lawyer, probably furious, probably terrified, definitely blaming me for destroying the family. Marcus was making a deal to testify against them, choosing self-preservation over loyalty. And me, I was the one who'd set all of this in motion by refusing to be a victim, by demanding justice. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted and sad and angry all at once. But I also felt something else, a fierce sense of rightness. What I was doing was hard, but it was right. And I was going to see it through to the end, no matter what it cost me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me look. Chandler, this is Jessica, Marcus's wife. I just found out everything. About the money, about what your parents did, about what Marcus knew. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I never would have accepted anything if I'd known. Please know that not everyone in your family is against you. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Thank you for reaching out." That means more than you know. Her response came quickly. Marcus is a mess. He knows he screwed up. He's going to testify and he's going to help however he can. It won't fix what happened, but maybe it's a start. Maybe it was, or maybe it was too little, too late. I honestly didn't know anymore. The formal charges were filed on a Thursday morning. By Thursday evening, my phone was flooded with calls and texts from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Some were supportive, shocked by what my parents had done. Others were angry, accusing me of betraying the family, of airing our dirty laundry in public, of being vindictive and cruel. I ignored most of them, but one call I did answer was from my father's sister, my Aunt Teresa. She'd always been the rebel of the family, the one who'd moved to New Mexico and lived her own life separate from the Chavez drama in Portland. "Chandler," she said when I answered, "I just heard what happened." "Are you okay?" I've been better, I admitted. I need you to know something. I believe you. I believe they did exactly what you're accusing them of. I felt tears spring to my eyes at the unexpected support. You do? Your father has always been obsessed with appearances, with seeming successful even when he wasn't. And your mother grew up with money but never learned how to manage it. This doesn't surprise me at all. What surprises me is that it took someone this long to catch them. I wish grandfather was still here, I said quietly. He would have known what to do. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Aunt Teresa said, Chandler, there's something you should know about your grandfather's death. Something in her tone made my blood run cold. What about it? He didn't just die of a stroke. I mean, yes, that's what killed him physically, but the stress that caused it. Chandler, your grandfather knew. He knew what Richard had done. What? How? He told me about 3 months before he died. He discovered that the charity money had been redirected. He was investigating, trying to figure out where it had gone. He confronted your father about it, and Richard admitted it. They had a terrible fight. Your grandfather was devastated. He said he'd never felt so betrayed in his life, that his own son had become someone he didn't recognize. I couldn't breathe. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he do something? He was ashamed. Ashamed that he'd raised a son capable of that, and he was torn because Richard was still his child. He kept saying he needed proof that he couldn't just accuse his own son without being absolutely certain. He was trying to gather evidence when the stroke happened. So Dad killed him, I said numbly. Not directly, but the stress, the betrayal. I don't know if I'd go that far, Aunt Teresa said carefully. But yes, I think the stress of discovering what Richard had done contributed to his death. Your grandfather's heart was already weak. The emotional blow might have been the final straw. I felt something shift inside me, the last vestiges of doubt or guilt about what I was doing evaporating completely. My father hadn't just stolen from me. He'd betrayed his own father so badly that it had contributed to his death. Does anyone else know this? I asked. Just me, as far as I know. Your grandfather made me promise not to tell anyone until after he died. He wanted to handle it himself, but then he died before he could. Would you be willing to testify to this in court? If it comes to that, yes. Chandler, I know this is hard, but you're doing the right thing. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for demanding justice. After we hung up, I immediately called Detective Mendez and told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. This changes things, she said finally. If we can prove that your grandfather discovered the theft and that the stress of it contributed to his death, we might be looking at additional charges. This is serious, Ms. Chavez. Good, I said, and I meant it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, interviews, and document reviews. Marcus made good on his promise to cooperate, sitting down with prosecutors and laying out everything he knew. The testimony he gave was damning. He described in detail how our parents had planned the theft, how they'd taken my expired ID from my purse during that weekend visit, how they'd practiced forging my signature until they got it right. He explained how they'd rationalized it to themselves and to him, how they'd convinced themselves it wasn't really stealing because I was family and didn't need the money. He also confessed to taking the $100,000 they'd given him, to knowing where it came from, to keeping silent about the crime for 2 years. His lawyer had negotiated immunity for his cooperation, but Marcus's reputation was destroyed. His employer had put him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the case. Jessica had stood by him, but their relationship was strained. I felt bad for Jessica. She'd done nothing wrong, but she was suffering the consequences anyway. That seemed to be the theme of this whole disaster, innocent people getting hurt because of my parents' greed and selfishness. The preliminary hearing was set for early June. I'd taken the day off work and sat in the courtroom, watching as my parents were led in by their attorney. They looked older than I remembered, more tired. My mother had been crying. I could see the redness around her eyes even from across the room. My father sat ramrod straight, his expression stony. Neither of them looked at me. The prosecution laid out the evidence. The forged documents, the bank records, the paper trail showing exactly where my money had gone. Nora testified as a forensic accountant, explaining in clear terms how my parents had systematically looted my trust fund and redirected my grandfather's charitable donation. Then Marcus took the stand. I watched my brother walk up there, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. He swore to tell the truth, then proceeded to betray our parents completely. He told the judge everything, his voice shaking but steady. When he got to the part about Dad admitting to the forgery, about how they'd justified it to themselves, I saw my mother start to cry silently. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack his teeth. When Marcus finished, my parents' lawyer tried to discredit his testimony, suggesting he was lying to save himself. But the documentary evidence backed up every word Marcus had said. There was no way to explain away the forged signature, the transfers, the company they'd set up with my stolen money. The judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. My parents were formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, grand theft, and a new charge the DA had added: financial elder abuse, based on their theft from my grandfather's estate. As they were led out of the courtroom, my mother finally looked at me. The expression on her face was one I'd never seen before, pure hatred. She mouthed something at me that might have been, "How could you?" Or might have been something worse. I looked away. Outside the courthouse, I was ambushed by a reporter from the Portland Tribune. "Ms. Chavez, how do you feel about your parents being charged? Do you have any regrets about pursuing criminal charges against your own family?" "No comment," I said, trying to push past her. "Is it true that your brother is testifying against them? How does it feel to have torn your family apart?" I stopped and looked at her directly. "I didn't tear my family apart. They did that when they decided to steal from me, when they decided that money was more important than integrity, than honesty, than their own daughter. I'm not the villain in this story. I'm the victim who refused to stay silent." Then I walked away, leaving her with her camera and her questions. That soundbite made the evening news. The next morning, I had dozens of messages from friends, colleagues, even former classmates I hadn't heard from in years. Most were supportive, but some were critical, saying I was being too harsh, that family should forgive, that I should have handled this privately. But what those people didn't understand was that there was no private way to handle this. My parents had committed crimes, real, serious crimes, and crimes required legal consequences, not just family drama and hurt feelings. The trial was set for September. In the meantime, life went on in that strange way it does during crises. I went to work, handled my cases, tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. But everything felt different now, like I was living in a parallel universe where your own parents could betray you and your brother could sell you out for a down payment on a house. Nora checked in with me regularly, making sure I was eating and sleeping, reminding me that I wasn't alone even when it felt like I was. My Aunt Teresa flew up to Seattle for a weekend, and we spent hours talking about my grandfather, about the family dynamics I'd never fully understood as a child, about patterns of dysfunction that went back generations. "Your grandmother, my mother, she was the same way," Teresa told me. "Always worried about appearances, about what people would think. She taught your father that image was everything, that you could do anything as long as you looked respectable on the outside. It's toxic, Chandler, and you breaking that cycle, refusing to play along, that's brave." I didn't feel brave. I felt exhausted and sad and angry, like I was grieving the family I'd thought I had while simultaneously fighting the family I'd actually gotten. But I didn't quit. I didn't back down. And when September finally came, I was ready. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in early September, one of those perfect late summer days when the sky was impossibly blue and the air smelled like the last of summer. It felt wrong somehow that the weather could be so beautiful while my life was falling apart in a Portland courtroom. I'd taken a leave of absence from work for the duration of the trial. My boss had been understanding, even supportive, telling me to take whatever time I needed. I was grateful, but I also knew that this case was all over the legal community now. Everyone knew that Chandler Chavez was suing her own parents. Some thought I was brave. Others thought I was vindictive. I tried not to care what anyone thought. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate. My parents sat at the defense table with their lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Brooks, who had a reputation for taking on difficult cases. I sat behind the prosecutor, a young but competent assistant DA named James Park. The jury selection had taken 2 days. James wanted people who would understand financial crimes, who wouldn't be swayed by sympathy for poor parents betrayed by their ungrateful daughter. Catherine wanted the opposite, people who would be horrified by a child taking her own parents to court. In the end, we got a mixed group. 8 women, 4 men, ranging in age from mid-20s to late 60s. They looked at me with curiosity and varying degrees of judgment as they filed in. The trial itself was intense and exhausting. Day after day of testimony, of experts explaining financial documents, of bank representatives verifying records. James was methodical, building the case brick by brick, showing exactly how my parents had gained access to my information, forged my signature, transferred my money, and used it for their own purposes. Nora was an excellent witness, explaining the forensic audit in terms anyone could understand. She walked the jury through every transaction, every transfer, showing how the money flowed from my trust fund into Chavez and Partners LLC, then out to purchase properties and into my parents' personal accounts. Is there any doubt in your professional opinion that the defendants systematically converted Ms. Chavez's trust fund for their own use? James asked. No doubt whatsoever, Nora said firmly. The evidence is clear and unambiguous. When it was Catherine's turn to cross-examine, she tried to suggest that the paper trail was more complicated than Nora was making it sound, that there could be innocent explanations. But Nora held her ground, calmly refuting each suggestion with specific evidence. Then came Marcus's testimony. This was the hardest part for me to watch. My brother walked to the witness stand looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past few months. He'd lost more weight, and his face had a hollow quality that made him look almost unrecognizable. James led him through his testimony, gently but thoroughly. Marcus described the day he'd found the documents in Dad's office, the confrontation that followed, the way our parents had rationalized their actions. And did your father admit to you that he had forged your sister's signature? James asked. Yes, Marcus said quietly. He said it was necessary. That Chandler wouldn't have agreed to give them the money if they'd asked, but she didn't need it anyway. He made it sound almost reasonable at the time. Did he express any remorse? No, he said they'd done what they had to do for the family business. That sometimes you have to make hard choices. And he gave you money to keep quiet about this? Marcus's voice was barely audible. Yes, $100,000. I took it. I knew where it came from, and I took it anyway because I wanted to buy a house with my fiancé. I convinced myself I could pay Chandler back someday, that it wasn't really stealing if I intended to make it right eventually. But I was lying to myself. I was just being selfish and cowardly. Catherine's cross-examination of Marcus was brutal. She painted him as a liar trying to save himself, someone who would say anything to avoid prosecution. She suggested that he'd made up the whole story about our parents confessing to him, that he was the one who'd actually stolen the money and was now framing them. But James had prepared Marcus well. He stayed calm, kept his answers consistent, and when Catherine tried to trap him in contradictions, he simply said, I'm telling the truth now. I should have told it 2 years ago. The prosecution's case took a full week. Then it was the defense's turn. Catherine's strategy was to attack my character and motives. She brought in witnesses who testified that I'd always been distant from my family, that I'd moved to Seattle to get away from them, that I'd never seemed to care much about family relationships. She implied that I was motivated by greed, that I wanted the money for myself, and was willing to destroy my parents to get it. Isn't it true, Ms. Chavez, Catherine asked when I took the stand, that you have harbored resentment toward your parents for years, that you felt they favored your brother over you? That's not true, I said evenly. My parents and I weren't close, but I didn't resent them. I just built my own life. A life that didn't include much contact with your family. I'm an independent person. That doesn't mean I wanted to hurt them. Yet here you are, pursuing criminal charges that could send your own parents to prison. Does that not seem vindictive to you? I looked at the jury, then back at Catherine. What seems vindictive to me is forging someone's signature to steal $500,000 from them. What seems vindictive is betraying your own daughter's trust for financial gain. I'm not being vindictive. I'm seeking justice for a crime that was committed against me. Catherine tried a different angle. You're a successful attorney, Ms. Chavez. You make a comfortable living. Did you really need this money? Whether I needed it or not is irrelevant, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my rising anger. It was mine. My grandfather left it to me. No one had the right to take it, regardless of how much money I make. But surely family should help each other. If your parents were struggling financially, wouldn't the loving thing to do be to help them? If they had asked me for help, I would have considered it. But they didn't ask. They stole. They forged my signature and committed fraud. There's a difference between asking for help and committing a felony. You seem very angry, Ms. Chavez. I am angry. Wouldn't you be if your own parents stole from you? Catherine smiled slightly as if I'd walked into a trap. But isn't that anger what this is really about? You're not seeking justice, you're seeking revenge. James objected before I could answer, and the judge sustained it. But the damage was done. I could see some of the jurors looking at me with uncertainty, wondering if maybe I was just a bitter daughter with an axe to grind. My parents didn't testify in their own defense. Catherine advised against it, probably knowing that under cross-examination, they'd have to admit to things that would only hurt their case. Instead, she called character witnesses, friends from their country club, colleagues from my father's business dealings, people from my mother's charity organizations. They all testified about what wonderful people Richard and Patricia Chavez were, how generous, how devoted to family, how impossible it was that they would do something like this. It was surreal, listening to these people describe parents I barely recognized. Was I the crazy one? Had I imagined the coldness, the emotional distance, the way love in my family had always been conditional on success and performance? But then James would show them the bank records, the forged documents, the paper trail that couldn't be explained away by character references and country club memberships. Facts were facts, and the facts were damning. The most powerful testimony came on the last day, when Aunt Teresa took the stand. James had subpoenaed her based on what I'd told him about my grandfather's final months. "Ms. Chavez," James said, "can you tell the jury about your conversation with your father, Eduardo Chavez, in the months before his death?" Teresa took a deep breath. "My father called me in January of last year. He was very upset. He said he'd discovered that money from his estate, money that was supposed to go to a children's literacy charity, had been redirected. He'd been investigating, and he traced it to a company that Richard had started. Did he confront Richard about this? Yes, he told me they'd had a terrible fight. Richard admitted to taking the money but said it was justified. He said the family needed it more than some charity. My father was devastated. He said he didn't know how he'd raised a son who could think that way." "How did your father seem emotionally during this time?" "He was heartbroken. Genuinely heartbroken. He kept saying he'd failed as a father, that he must have done something wrong to raise a child capable of such betrayal. He wasn't sleeping well. He was under tremendous stress." "And when did he pass away?" 2 months later. The official cause was a stroke, but his doctor had warned him that stress was extremely dangerous given his heart condition. The emotional turmoil of discovering what Richard had done, I believe it contributed to his death. Catherine objected strenuously to this characterization, and the judge instructed the jury to disregard Teresa's opinion about the cause of death. But the seed was planted. The jury had heard that my grandfather had discovered the theft, that it had caused him tremendous emotional distress, and that he died shortly after. When Catherine cross-examined Teresa, she tried to suggest that Teresa was estranged from Richard and might be lying out of some family grudge. But Teresa held firm. "I'm not estranged from my brother," she said calmly. "I'm horrified by what he did. There's a difference." The closing arguments took most of a Friday. James methodically reviewed the evidence, showing how every piece supported the conclusion that my parents had deliberately, knowingly, and systematically stolen from me. He reminded the jury that this wasn't about family drama. It was about the law, about right and wrong, about holding people accountable for their actions regardless of their relationship to the victim. "Richard and Patricia Chavez want you to believe that this is a family matter, that Chandler Chavez is a vindictive daughter attacking loving parents," James said. "But the evidence shows something very different. It shows two people who saw an opportunity to take money that wasn't theirs, who carefully planned and executed a fraud, who forged documents and lied to banks and their own daughter. They want you to feel sorry for them because their daughter had the courage to demand justice. I ask you not to be swayed by emotion, but to look at the facts. And the facts are clear. Richard and Patricia Chavez are guilty." Catherine's closing was emotional, appealing to the jury's sympathy and their sense of family loyalty. She painted a picture of parents who had always struggled financially, who had made one mistake out of desperation, who now faced losing everything because their daughter was too proud to forgive them. "Yes, Richard and Patricia Chavez made mistakes," she said. "They acted unwisely. But should they lose their freedom, their reputation, their entire lives because their daughter refuses to forgive them? Families are complicated. Relationships are messy. Sometimes people do things they shouldn't, but that doesn't make them criminals. It makes them human. I ask you to remember that when you deliberate. These are not hardened criminals. They are parents who made a bad decision and whose daughter has chosen prosecution over forgiveness." I watched the jury's faces, trying to gauge their reactions. Some looked sympathetic to Catherine's argument. Others looked unmoved, focused on the evidence rather than the emotion. I had no idea which way they would go. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of waiting, of obsessively checking my phone, of barely eating or sleeping. Nora stayed with me the entire time, making sure I didn't completely fall apart. Marcus texted me once, asking if I was okay. I didn't respond. On Sunday evening, my phone rang. It was James. They've reached a verdict. We're back in court tomorrow morning at 9. That night was the longest of my life. I lay awake until 3 in the morning, my mind racing through every possible outcome. What if they found my parents not guilty? What if the jury believed Catherine's version of events, that I was just a vindictive daughter? What if I'd destroyed my family for nothing? But then I'd remember the forged signature, the stolen money, the way my parents had looked me in the eye and lied. And I'd know that I'd done the right thing, regardless of the verdict. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Word had spread that a verdict was coming, and reporters filled the gallery along with curious observers and the few family members who'd chosen sides. Aunt Teresa sat behind me. On the other side of the aisle, I saw some of my parents' country club friends, there to support them. My parents were let in, both looking exhausted. My mother had aged visibly over the course of the trial. My father's face was haggard, the arrogance I'd always associated with him replaced by something that looked almost like fear. The jury filed in, none of them looking at the defense or prosecution. I'd read somewhere that was a bad sign for whichever side they wouldn't look at. They weren't looking at my parents. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The forewoman, a woman in her 50s wearing a blue blazer, stood up. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of fraud in the first degree, how do you find?" "We find the defendants guilty." My mother gasped audibly. My father remained stone-faced. "On the charge of forgery, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of grand theft, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of financial elder abuse, how do you find?" "Guilty." Guilty on all counts. I felt Nora's hand squeeze mine. Behind me, Aunt Teresa was crying softly. Across the aisle, my mother had collapsed against my father, sobbing. He sat rigidly, staring straight ahead as if he could will himself out of this reality through sheer force of denial. The judge thanked the jury and set a sentencing date for 6 weeks later. My parents were allowed to remain free on bail until then, but their lawyer looked devastated. 4 guilty verdicts meant serious prison time was likely. Outside the courthouse, I was immediately surrounded by reporters. I'd prepared a statement with James's help, knowing this moment would come. "I want to thank the jury for carefully considering the evidence and reaching a just verdict," I said, reading from my phone to keep my voice steady. This case was never about revenge or vindictiveness. It was about holding people accountable for their actions, regardless of who they are. My parents committed serious crimes, and they've been found guilty. I hope this sends a message that no one is above the law, not even family. And I hope it gives courage to other victims of financial abuse to come forward and seek justice. "Ms. Chavez," a reporter shouted, "do you feel any regret about your parents potentially going to prison?" I looked directly at the camera. "I feel regret that they put themselves in this position. I feel regret that they chose to steal from me rather than be honest. I feel regret that my grandfather died knowing his own son had betrayed him. But I don't regret seeking justice. That's what the legal system is for." Later that evening, alone in my hotel room, I finally let myself fall apart. I cried for the family I'd never really had, for the parents who had cared more about money than about their daughter, for my grandfather who died heartbroken. I cried for Marcus and Jessica, whose lives had been upended by all of this. I even cried for my parents because despite everything, some part of me still remembered being a little girl who'd loved them before I understood what they really were. But mostly, I cried from sheer exhaustion and relief. It was over. The verdict was in. I'd won, except it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. The sentencing hearing was held on a cold October morning. The judge had reviewed the pre-sentencing reports, the victim impact statements, and the arguments from both sides about what the appropriate punishment should be. James argued for significant prison time. "These defendants showed no remorse, Your Honor. Even after being confronted with overwhelming evidence, they continued to deny wrongdoing. They blamed their daughter for pursuing charges. They showed no understanding of the seriousness of their crimes or the harm they caused. Without a significant sentence, there's every reason to believe they would reoffend." Catherine argued for leniency. "Your Honor, my clients are first-time offenders in their 60s. They have no criminal history. They've lost everything already: their reputation, their business, the respect of their community. A lengthy prison sentence would be excessive. They could serve their debt to society through community service and probation." The judge listened to both arguments, then turned to my parents. "Do either of you wish to address the court before I impose sentence?" My father stood slowly. For a moment, I thought he might actually apologize, might finally show some remorse. Instead, he said, Your Honor, I maintain that I did nothing wrong. Everything I did was for my family. I don't recognize this court's authority to judge me for how I chose to manage family resources. This entire prosecution is a travesty driven by my daughter's bitterness and desire for revenge. I felt Nora tense beside me. Even now, even after being found guilty by a jury of his peers, my father couldn't admit fault. He genuinely believed he'd done nothing wrong. My mother didn't speak. She just cried silently, her hands clutched around a tissue. The judge's expression hardened. Mr. Chavez, the fact that you continue to show no remorse or understanding of your crimes is deeply concerning. You stole from your own daughter. You forged her signature. You betrayed your father's trust and possibly contributed to his death through the stress you caused him. These are not family matters. These are serious criminal offenses. She paused, looking down at her papers. Richard Chavez, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison on the fraud charge, 3 years on the forgery charge, 4 years on the grand theft charge, and 3 years on the financial elder abuse charge, all to run concurrently. Patricia Chavez, given that you played a lesser role in planning these crimes but still participated knowingly, you are sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with all charges running concurrently. My mother let out a wail. My father closed his eyes briefly, but his face remained impassive. Additionally, the judge continued, you are both ordered to pay full restitution to Chandler Chavez in the amount of $500,000 plus interest, and to the Literacy for Children Foundation in the amount of $200,000 plus interest. All assets of Chavez and Partners LLC will be liquidated to satisfy these restitution orders. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. It was done. My parents were led away by the bailiffs. My father walked with his head high, still defiant. My mother could barely walk, supported on either side by officers. Neither of them looked at me. I watched them go, feeling nothing but emptiness. This was justice. This was accountability. This was the right outcome. So why did I feel so hollow? Outside, the reporters were waiting again, but I had no statement prepared this time. I just wanted to go home, crawl into bed, and sleep for a week. Marcus was waiting by my car. He looked terrible, gaunt and pale, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping any better than I was. Chandler, he said as I approached. Can we talk, please? I stopped, car keys in hand. What do you want, Marcus? I need you to know how sorry I am, for all of it. For taking the money, for keeping quiet, for not standing up for you when I should have. I know I can't fix what I did, but I need you to know that I regret it every single day. Your regrets don't change anything, I said tiredly. You made your choices. You took money you knew was stolen and you kept quiet about it for 2 years. You only came forward when you had no other choice. I know, you're right, but Jessica and I were trying to make it right. We sold our house and we're paying back every cent of that $100,000. It'll take years, but we're doing it. And I'm seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I made such awful decisions. I want to be better, Chandler. I want to be someone you could maybe eventually forgive. I looked at my little brother and saw not the confident young man he'd been a year ago, but someone broken and humbled by his own mistakes. Part of me wanted to hug him to tell him it would be okay, but a larger part was still too angry, too hurt. I appreciate you telling me that, I said finally. And I'm glad you're trying to make things right, but Marcus, I can't forgive you right now. Maybe someday. But not today, I need time. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand, just don't give up on me completely, okay? I know I don't deserve it, but I'm still your brother. Yeah, I said quietly. You are. For better or worse, you're still my brother. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing there until I turned the corner and he disappeared from view. 6 months after the sentencing, I was sitting in my Seattle apartment on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a Portland area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Ms. Chavez, this is Jennifer Rodriguez from the Literacy for Children Foundation. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. No, it's fine. What can I do for you? Well, I wanted to personally thank you. We finally received the restitution payment that was ordered by the court, $200,000 plus interest. Ms. Chavez, this money will change so many children's lives. We can expand our reading programs, hire more tutors, reach communities we've never been able to serve before. I know this whole situation has been difficult for you, but I wanted you to know that something good has come from it. I felt tears spring to my eyes unexpectedly. Thank you for calling, that means a lot to hear. Your grandfather would be proud, I think. This is what he wanted, for that money to help children learn to read. It took a difficult path to get here, but it's finally going to fulfill his wishes. After we hung up, I sat with my coffee, thinking about my grandfather, about the trust fund he'd left me, intending for it to give me freedom and security, about the charity donation he'd made, wanting to help children who didn't have the advantages his granddaughter had. His intentions had been good. It wasn't his fault that his own son had twisted them, stolen them, corrupted them. And in the end, despite everything, his wishes were being honored. The charity was getting their money, and I was getting mine back bit by bit as the properties were sold off. Money couldn't fix what had been broken in my family. It couldn't undo the betrayal or heal the wounds, but at least there was some justice in the world. At least wrongdoing had consequences. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Nora. "Coffee, I have news about your case against the trust fund to sue for emotional damages. The lawyer thinks we have a shot." I smiled despite myself. Nora had become more than just my best friend through all of this. She'd been my advocate, my researcher, my shoulder to cry on, my reminder that not everyone in my life was toxic. Another text came through, this one from Aunt Teresa. "Thinking of you today, Mija. Remember, you broke the cycle. You stood up for yourself. Eduardo would be so proud." Then, surprisingly, one from Jessica. "Hey Chandler, Marcus wanted me to tell you that we made another payment toward the restitution. $5,000 this month. We're getting there slowly. Hope you're doing okay." I sat back, looking at these messages from the people who had stood by me, who had supported me, who had believed me when my own parents had tried to make me doubt my own reality. This was my real family, the one I'd chosen, the one built on honesty and respect rather than blood and obligation. My parents were in prison, serving their sentences. I'd heard through the grapevine that my father was still maintaining his innocence, still insisting he'd done nothing wrong. My mother had apparently become very involved in the prison chapel, seeking redemption through religion. I didn't know if she felt genuinely remorseful or if it was just another performance, another way to be seen as the victim rather than the perpetrator. I'd thought about visiting them, thought about it and decided against it. Maybe someday, years from now, when the wounds weren't so fresh. But not now. Now, I needed to focus on healing myself, on rebuilding the trust they'd shattered, on learning how to have healthy relationships after growing up in such a dysfunctional family. I'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Alina Martinez, who specialized in family trauma. She'd helped me understand that my parents' behavior wasn't about me, it was about them, about their own brokenness, their own failures. She'd helped me see that seeking justice wasn't vindictive, it was healthy. That setting boundaries wasn't cruel, it was necessary. That I had every right to be angry, hurt, and betrayed, and that those feelings were valid. "You survived," Dr. Martinez had told me in our last session. "You survived a family that didn't know how to love you properly, and instead of perpetuating the dysfunction, you broke the pattern. That takes incredible strength." I hadn't felt strong during most of this ordeal. I'd felt weak, vulnerable, hurt. But looking back now, I could see her point. I'd stood up for myself when it would have been easier to stay silent. I'd demanded justice when others would have sacrificed their own well-being to keep the peace. I'd chosen truth over comfortable lies. That was strength, even if it hadn't felt like it at the time. I opened my laptop and checked my bank account. The first restitution payment had come through last month, $50,000 from the sale of one of the rental properties. There would be more as the other properties sold and assets were liquidated. Eventually, I'd get back most of what had been stolen from me, minus legal fees and the costs of the investigation. But more importantly, I'd gotten back my sense of self. My understanding that I had value beyond what I could achieve or provide. My knowledge that I deserved honesty and respect, and that demanding those things wasn't selfish, it was basic human dignity. A thought occurred to me then, something that had been percolating in the back of my mind for weeks. I opened a new browser tab and searched for how to start a scholarship fund. If my grandfather had wanted his money to help people, to make a difference in the world, then I could honor that intention. I could take the money that was being returned to me and use it to create something meaningful, something that would outlast all of this ugliness and pain. I spent the rest of that morning researching foundations and scholarship programs, learning about the process of setting up a charitable fund. By early afternoon, I had the outline of a plan. The Eduardo Chavez Legal Scholarship Fund would provide financial assistance to first-generation college students pursuing degrees in law. Students who came from families without resources, who had to work their way through school like I had, who dreamed of careers in justice, but didn't have the financial cushion to take unpaid internships or cover bar exam fees. I'd fund it with half of the restitution money. $250,000 to start, with the intention of adding more over time as I could afford it. It wouldn't bring my grandfather back. It wouldn't undo what my parents had done. But it would create something good from something terrible. It would help young people who reminded me of myself, determined, hardworking, fighting for a future despite obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Over the next few weeks, I worked with a nonprofit attorney to set up the foundation properly. We established the criteria for recipients, the application process, the oversight committee. Nora agreed to serve on the board. Aunt Teresa enthusiastically signed on as well. Even Marcus, tentatively, asked if he could be involved once he'd finished paying his restitution as a way of making amends. I told him we'd discuss it when the time came. The first scholarship was awarded that December. A young woman named Maria Santos, daughter of immigrants, who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through undergrad and was now heading to law school. When I met her at the scholarship ceremony, I saw in her eyes the same determination I'd once seen in my own mirror. "Thank you," she said, shaking my hand. "You have no idea what this means to me. I was going to have to take out so many loans, maybe delay school for another year to save more money. This scholarship changes everything." "You earned it," I told her. "Your hard work, your dedication, your commitment to justice, that's what got you here. The scholarship just removes one barrier, the rest is all you." That night, I went home to my apartment and looked out at the Seattle skyline, the lights of the city twinkling in the darkness. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the stolen money, the investigation, the trial, the verdict, the sentencing. All of it had been painful. All of it had cost me something. But I'd survived. More than survived, I'd grown. I'd learned who I really was when tested, what I was capable of when pushed to my limits. I'd learned that blood doesn't automatically equal family, that sometimes the people you choose are more loyal than the ones you're born to. I'd learned that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Marcus. "Saw the news about your scholarship fund. Grandfather would be proud." "I'm proud of you too, even though I know I don't have the right to say that. You're a better person than I am." I looked at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm not better, I just made different choices. There's still time for you to make better ones too." His response came quickly. "I'm trying. Every day I'm trying. Thank you for not giving up on me completely." I set the phone down and smiled slightly. Maybe Marcus would become someone I could have a real relationship with again someday. Maybe my mother in prison would eventually understand the gravity of what she'd done. Maybe even my father would, though I doubted it. Or maybe none of those things would happen. Maybe my family was broken beyond repair, and these were just wounds that would scar over but never fully heal. Either way, I would be okay. I had built a life I was proud of. I had friends who loved me and supported me. I had work that mattered and a future that was mine to shape. I had taken back control from people who tried to steal it, and in doing so, I discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. My grandfather had left me $500,000, intending it to give me security and freedom. My parents had stolen it, intending to enrich themselves at my expense. And in fighting to get it back, I'd found something more valuable than any trust fund. I'd found myself. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to my grandfather, wherever he was. "Thank you," I whispered. Not just for the money, but for believing I was strong enough to stand up for myself. For teaching me that integrity matters more than comfort. I hope I'm making you proud. Outside my window, the city continued its endless motion, millions of people living their lives, facing their own battles, making their own choices. I was just one person in that vast sea of humanity, but I'd made my choice. I'd chosen truth over lies, justice over peace, self-respect over family approval. And standing there in my apartment, looking out at the world I'd built for myself, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt free.